Hi, Dr. Reagan Robertson, CCO of Productive Dentist Academy here, and I have a question for you. Are you finding it hard to get your team aligned to your vision, but you know you deserve growth just like everybody else? That's why we've created the PDA Productivity Workshop. For nearly 20 years, PDA workshops have helped dentists just like you align their teams, get control of scheduling, and create productive practices that they love walking into every day. Just imagine how you will feel when you know your schedule is productive, your systems are humming, and your team is aligned to your vision. It's simple, but it's not necessarily easy. We can help. Visit productivedentist.com/workshop. That's productivedentist.com/workshop to secure your seats now. Doctor, you got an offer on your dental practice. Hooray! You are looking at all those zeros on the sheet and you might be sorely tempted to take that offer. Money in the bank, less stress, what could be wrong? Well, wait. What you may not know is that you could be adding more zeros to that offer with just a little extra research and help. Think about it like going from good to great. This is why I am so excited to have Kyle Francis from Professional Transition Services with us today. He is going to share with you the 3 biggest mistakes dental entrepreneurs make when selling their practice and how you can avoid those same mistakes and add millions, yes, millions, to the final value of your practice when you do decide to make that transition. Welcome to the Everyday Practices Podcast. I'm Reagan Robertson, and my co-host, Dr. Chad Johnson, and I are on a mission to share the stories of everyday dentists who generate extraordinary results using practical, proven methods you can take right into your own dental practice. If you're ready to elevate patient care and produce results that are anything but ordinary, buckle up and listen in. Welcome to Everyday Practices Dental Podcast. I am your host, Reagan Robertson, here on a very sunny afternoon this summer in the San Juan Islands. Our faithful co-host is busy right now doing dentistry, of all things. Shame on him for helping people get healthier. He wishes us luck today. I am here with a very special guest, Kyle Francis of
Professional Transition Strategies.
Professional Transition Strategies, which is right up in the screen of your beautiful blue screen back there, green screen.
It's either this way or this way. Yep.
Yeah. So I met Kyle, gosh, I want to say a year ago now. And it was during we are looking into different ways to optimize our dental practices. We are always wanting to get the most for our private practices. And so we were introduced to you, Kyle, and I have just been blown away with some of the results you've been able to get doctors as they are looking into transition. And so I really was excited to bring you on the podcast so we could talk about that today and really address some of the biggest mistakes that happen when, dental entrepreneurs decide to sell their practice. And, when you look at like buying a car, you always want to get the best deal. And so you might sit there for a few hours and haggle and, think, yeah, maybe I saved a couple of $1,000s on that. It's fine. It's a car. It's a vehicle. It's a temporary thing. But when it comes to your livelihood, yep, and making that big of a transition, I can imagine how it feels to kind of get to the end of the line there like that and think to yourself, did I do everything I could?
Well, do you know what? There's actually a psychological theory about that specific thing, not just in dentistry, but it's in entrepreneurship. It's called founder syndrome. And founder syndrome is a really, really unique concept. It has to do with how the business that you've created or bought and you've been operating for years and years and years, it becomes kind of like a member of the family, right?
Yes.
It's an income producing member of the family as well. So it's a really, really important part of that family. And so, look, I've got it, right? I've got founder syndrome with my own business, right? And we end up talking with tons and tons of doctors out there that end up having these exact same kind of emotional entanglements with their financial future, right? And that is, by the way, syndrome sounds like a bad thing. It's just one of those things that you need to understand that there are emotions tied with all these decisions, right? And like, okay, what is right? What is not right? Why am I being told these things? All that really matters from an analysis standpoint. So we talk about that a bunch.
I didn't know that it was called founder syndrome. So, I'm going to be Googling this now because I always talk about it being, I say you get tied up as part of your identity.
Oh, so, yeah, completely.
right? When you retire, you don't have purpose. So, through my BMS coaching with Donald Miller, we talk a lot about, identifying your purpose and how your purpose transitions over time. But even though I am not a physical owner of like PDA, I've been here 12 years and I feel that emotional entanglement, you take it on as part of your own identity. And it could be very hard to kind of untangle yourself from this. So when it gets
even like a simple change sometimes can be, really, really, really hard to wrap your brain around. So it doesn't have to be as big as, thinking about transitioning out of your practice or thinking about monetizing it in a certain way, all those kind of things. It can be as easy as, should I or should I not renew this lease for the next 5 years, or should it be a 10-year lease? All those kind of things. But like, if you know that you have this as part of your brain, it allows you to make better decisions going forward. So
I wonder if it allows you to take, like adding an associate. I've seen lots of dentists really get pressured around this. For me, myself, I separate into 2 buckets. So I put on the left side, what are the data points? It's kind of like facts and feelings. So what are my data points? And then what are the emotions around each data point? So I try to ask myself, why am I having a reaction to this? Or why does this matter to me? It's almost like an Excel sheet in my head.
I think you and I might think very similarly. I love making lists like that, and I do pros and cons, and I do all those different kinds of things. I do that a lot, and it's just kind of so you kind of led me into. Are you familiar with the success rate of how often an associate works out over a 5-year time horizon? Do you know that stat?
No.
Do you want to guess?
I don't want to guess.
Nope, I don't blame you. Okay, so it's good. It's 20% of the time it works out over a 5-year time horizon. It's like the worst in all of medicine. It's the worst in all medicine. It's not even close. And I look, early on in my career, I used to do associateship placements, and I actually quit for this reason. I was outpacing it by about double. I was getting about 40% of mine to stick. But here's the thing. Yeah, well, we did all sorts of personality profiling. We were doing all sorts of different types of things. Yeah. But if I look at it, the issue ends up being that 60% of the time I was getting a ticked off seller or a ticked off associate coming to me and saying, why'd you put me with that bum? And so anyway, I decided to stop doing that. But it's kind of funny. You talk about putting that list down. We used to do those lists for associateship placements, and yeah, it's a tough gig. I very much respect all the headhunters out there. That's a tough job. So
I think we'll create a separate podcast episode around that, because it would be very intriguing. We've really transformed our own company over the last 7 years and worked really hard on the culture element, which you can influence culture, but culture is what culture is. It's just, it exists currently. Right. And so we've done a lot of that personality profiling and trying for skill set. So there definitely is, I think, a formula to finding that successful fit, but still it's an associate in a world of entrepreneurially minded people. Makes it, additionally difficult.
Yeah. Well, I've also found like the incentives are really hard unless you're tied together with that singular purpose of ownership. Right. And if you don't have that, then suddenly there's all these power dynamics that get in the way of even, trying to develop the culture and all that kind of stuff. Now, if you're a really, really skilled leader, you can get through that. Right. Yeah. But if you're not a very skilled leader, or if that person who's come on board is not willing to take, that leadership, those kind of things, it's a hard, a hard rat's nest to untangle, so yeah.
What I like about this conversation is it plants it right here in my chest. So I'm putting myself in the doctor's shoes and I'm thinking about some of these things that we know our dentists have gone through over the decades of being in business. And when I think about it like that, I'm like, Kyle, let's just take the first offer. Let's just take the offer, transition out. I'm sure you've worked with doctors that feel that way.
Completely. Yeah. So, look, I would say that, if there was a first thing that I would say, well, hey, just don't do this, it would be that, right? Maybe I'll tell you a quick story. I was early on in my career, I had the opportunity to speak at a whole bunch of different dental schools. And I did so because I was doing mostly individual to individual style transactions. I was working out in West Texas. It took a lot of data points or a lot of different folks looking at a certain practice before they would finally be willing to go out to Seminole and Alpine and Abilene and all these other places. And so anyway, because I was out there, the doctors are always asked like, well, hey, how is it that I best get into, a practice? What if you don't have one for sale? And the examples that I would give them is I say, okay, look, run a survey in that area. You pick out your geographic area and go ahead and write handwritten letters to each one of those doctors, right? Write handwritten letters to each one of those doctors. Many of them will say, yeah, absolutely, let's talk, all that kind of stuff. Now, here's the thing. What I just did is I put the buyer in the advantage, right? And the reason being is now they have data points out there and they have multiple different options of different places that they can go and look, right? So essentially what you're doing whenever you're doing that is you are decreasing practice value in a way, right? Because they have multiple places they can go. So multiple sellers are vying for their attention, right?
Yes.
So the exact same thing happens in private equity, right? So this is not an unusual concept, right? What they do is they send out all these letters, they send out all this marketing material, they send out all this different stuff. And now they're the ones with the power in the relationship because they have 100 different data points and they can partner with who they think is going to be the right ones. And they obviously want to partner with the ones that they can buy most effectively and efficiently, right? And so I don't blame them for doing that. Really, if you think about it, they have shareholders, right? And some of those shareholders are doctors, right? That have already come on board with them. And so you want them to be able to get the best deal for their shareholders. But it's unbelievable to me how often a doctor just says, oh, well, I just got this letter and I just started this conversation. I'm just going to go ahead and do this, right?
Absolutely.
Most of the time, it does not lead to the most optimal type of decision on that back end.
It's a lot like when somebody offers you money for a house in a hot market. I've had friends get so excited because they feel like, oh, you've picked me.
Right.
It's that feeling of, oh, you've picked me, not necessarily the best deal. It's almost like you're focusing in the wrong area. You're putting your emotional bank in the wrong area. And I never thought about shifting the power dynamic like that. I'll tell you, one time I was very young. I was in my early 20s. So poor as poor can be for me. Like, I mean, I didn't have a car. I didn't have cable TV at home. Like I was just getting by. And there was an artist, he put up all of his art in this great Italian restaurant and the pieces were $10,000 to $20,000. These were beautiful, massive pieces. And I thought, I really want a piece of his. Obviously, it is not in the cards for me. So I found his email online. Internet was still fairly new. And I emailed him and I said, I am young. I don't have any money. I can bake great cookies. Would you consider selling me a piece of art? And I thought, of course, obviously he's not going to respond, right?
Right.
He did.
What?
He did. And he said, I happen to love chocolate chip cookies. And if you don't tell my agent, I will print one on canvas for you. And
Amazing.
So, yeah, he lived like an hour and a half away from me. I drove down with it was like Halloween time. So McDonald's gives you those little like Happy Meal plastic, like trick or treat tubs. So I filled like 2 of them with cookies, took him down. He took me into his studio. He gave me that. Plus he gave me some originals. It was like an unbelievable experience. And I thought, if you don't try, you never know what can happen. And so for you to take, like, when I think of professional transition strategies, I think of a very like high caliber, sleek, modern organization. And you're like, write some letters out and send them out.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I mean, it's like the little stuff that ends up working. Because I mean, look, maybe I tell you one more. So we worked with a doctor out in Portland. This doctor, very nice practice, right? So like $2.6 million top line, something like $800,000 in EBITDA, which is just a metric for profitability, right? Yeah. So by the way, if I ever end up going down the acronym rabbit hole, just let me know. I'll try to unwind myself from that.
EBITDA, explain. Well, I'm always surprised. My assumption is that every doctor knows what EBITDA is, but that's not always the case. So what is EBITDA?
Okay, so the way I think about EBITDA, technically it's an acronym. It stands for earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization. Really, it's just a fancy way of talking about net profit. The easiest way for a doctor to be thinking about this is going to be, let's say that they no longer wanted to practice chairside, right? And they needed to find an associate to do all the work out of the practice. Well, you have to pay that associate a fair wage, right?
Yes.
So how much is left over from the practice after all the expenses are paid, including that new associate's comp, right? That's the amount of EBITDA in a practice.
Perfect.
Yep.
And businesses are valued often off of that number. Is that correct?
Absolutely. So yeah, it's just like a recurring cash flow, right? So if you think about it like an annuity, right? Dental practices are unbelievably hard to kill in total. And I was kind of a weird way of talking about it, but it's a 0.3% default rate, right? So so it's only 3 out of 1,000 end up failing. It's unbelievable, right?
So it's a very stable bet. It's a
very much so. So that annuity has a really high chance of going on into the future, right? And so because of that, they value it based on that recurring cash flow because there's a really high probability it's going to continue.
That makes a lot of sense. So this doctor in Portland had 2.6
Yeah,
top line and
$2.6 million
800.
top line, $800,000 in EBITDA. And he had gotten a letter from one of the DSOs that was out there, right? And that letter said, hey, we would love to have this conversation. He went through the entire thing. He ended up getting an offer from them. The offer was not bad, by the way. It was a fine offer. However, as he went through the process, he just kind of had this pit in his stomach. And he's like, I don't know, this just doesn't feel right. I'm not 100% sure. Not that he didn't like him or anything like that. It's just like something didn't feel right, right? And so I'm a big believer in, listening to your gut, right? And then acting on it, right? He did.
Yes.
So he was referred into us. And I'm not saying that we're anything special in this way by any stretch of the imagination, but essentially what we did is we just changed the power dynamic, right? What we did is we appraised the practice. We took him out to market. He ended up having interest by, I think, 30 or 40 different groups. We introduced him to the top 7 or so. It's kind of funny. He ended up choosing the group that he originally talked to. Here's the thing. We increased the overall valuation by 1.8 million. Right.
Whoa.
So now here's the thing. Now that's not everyone, right? So this is not everyone's story, but at the same time,
is this like the weight loss asterisk at the bottom? Results may vary.
Yeah, exactly. But I knew that whenever I talked to him and he showed me the LOI, I was just like, oh, come on, like we can do better than that, And so anyway, but I've shot people straight the other way as well, which is like sometimes people will tell me like, hey, can you just give me your opinion on this?
Yes.
Like, all right, that actually seems pretty reasonable. If I were you, you might go ahead and take that one,
Yes.
But it is way more often that we end up seeing something like, oh man, if we just switch the power dynamics on it, it will work out way better for you.
Wow. I have never thought about it like that. So this is really like a masterclass in negotiation tactics. I know we've got like the BMS has a negotiation class that I took. And when I think of negotiation, I think of something like hostile, like a hostage situation or something. Right. And I didn't realize that we're making those decisions every single day. We're negotiating with each other every single day. So switching that power dynamic, and I can see you in my head without knowing what you're doing, but I can see you almost taking the data and the emotion pieces of it and going down the offers and then making your argument for why, or is that how you do it?
It's so funny you say that. All right. So what we do is we put everything together on what we call a scorecard, right? And that scorecard essentially breaks down all of the different offers based on their independent parts. So it's financial. It's like, who did you like? Because we actually pull them afterwards. It's like, so rank them, right? Who did you like the best and why do you like them and all that kind of stuff. So it needs to be quantitative. It needs to be qualitative. And then by the way, we compare and contrast it to don't do a darn thing. Right. Which is going to be, look, your practice is sweet already, right? You don't have to do anything here. So if you don't want to, then don't, right? And this is how your life is going to look for you. And there's pluses and minuses with all that. So it's kind of funny. You talk about how like you're thinking that way. And I really do. Like I also produce in that way as well. So like the different things that we actually produce for the doctors look very similar to that.
You're like a financial counterpart to my brain. So my background is all messaging and marketing. And so what you do financially speaking, I'm doing over in the messaging. So that's, I think that's fascinating. Yeah. That's another podcast topic for another day. What I love that you just said though, is when you were saying, you don't have to do anything. Mentally, neurologically, like I can feel my chest start to kind of calm down, like, okay, because this is a big decision. We know that our identity is tied up in this. We have the founder syndrome going on. And so it puts control to me back into that owner's seat of, okay, we have a moment to breathe and think about it. You don't have to do anything. Or if you do, here are some available options to you. That has to feel good for the doctors that you work with.
Well, look, the thing I'm most passionate about in total is helping doctors make really great decisions. To me, the way that you make a really great decision is setting up your own comp structure, right? You need comparables. You need to understand why you're making the decision the way that you're making it, all that kind of stuff. And by the way, the emotions are real in all these different things. Can I tell you a story that's not nearly as great, but is like kind of proves that point? Okay. So earlier on in my career, this is probably 2009, I was in the process of selling a practice here in Colorado where I live. And in an old guy, right? So he was already, I think he turned 80 at that point. So he was one of the oldest dentists in Colorado. And he knew he needed to sell, right? And so we found an individual buyer who was going to come in. He was actually going to merge his practice into that practice. We'd already had all the documents set up, legal reviews done, banking is done. Everybody's just waiting to sign, right?
Yeah.
A few days before signing, he calls me up and he's like, hey, can I take you to lunch? It's like, yeah, of course. he always liked to go to Subway. So we went to Subway. And so we're sitting there in Subway and he said, Kyle, I'm so sorry, I can't do it. Right. And I was like, okay, well, look, if you don't want to do it, then that's completely fine. We'll work together whenever the time's right, all those kind of things. But I knew this was founder syndrome. I just knew it. I was like, there's no reason that he wouldn't have made this decision. The doctor who's coming in was great. They were friends, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And anyway, the bummer of it is that less than a year later, he ended up getting T-boned on coming home from work, and he no longer could practice. Yeah. Now, here's the thing. I ended up selling the patients, right? So sold the patients, I sold the assets separately, all that kind of stuff. So the practice broke up. And he ended up making about $700,000 or $800,000 less than he would have otherwise. Now, fortunately for him, he practiced for a very long time. He'd done fine, he set aside plenty of money for all of his kiddos, all that kind of stuff. Oh,
good. So he wasn't destitute.
Yeah, it was not a bad thing. But if I look at him, like, oh man, like I'm pretty utilitarian, right? And so my utilitarian brain is like, oh, like all we had to do is like get over this one little tiny emotional hurdle and it would have been easy, Now obviously you have no idea what's coming in the future, right? And so you don't want to make a decision out of weakness in that way, but at the same time, just kind of knowing that little kind of voice in the back of your head could be leading you down that direction. Again, it's just wise to know. So
do you ever study the hero's journey or know much about the hero's journey?
I know some, yes.
In the hero's journey, it takes what every human ends up going through. Everybody is a hero in their own life. And there is always, and it's a pattern specific thing. Like it occurs again and again and again in your life. When you make a big decision, you can have a guide. So you, Kyle, are the guide in this story. So he's the hero and you are guiding him, and all you can do, it's kind of like leading the horse to water. You can't make them drink. You can give them everything you can in your power. And the hero has to make that final decision, and they always have to go it alone. There's that point.
That's good. I might steal that. That's really, really good.
Well, if you're in Texas this September at the IGP Summit, then we'll chat about that.
I'll be there. I'll be there.
Yeah. So what about the doctors that, so this doctor, even at 80, it sounds like he at least did some planning, which was good. So he had set his children up. He was okay. So while it hurt, it didn't devastate him. How many doctors do you see have a plan in place?
Yeah. So if I it's funny. So if you ever hit on number one, which is going to be, don't just take the first one. The second one is going to be, if I look at planning, it is unreal how many times we see folks that have said, I have no idea what my practice is worth. I have no idea how much money I'm making out of my practice. I don't really know what I want into the future, all of those kind of things. And, it's the old adage that it's just beginning with the end in mind, right?
Yes.
And, what's it, Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, right? And so if you think about it in those terms, man, it would be really, really good to know what most likely your largest asset is, and then how you want to handle it into the future, right? Because here's the thing, are we going through a consolidation wave? Absolutely. Does that mean you need to be involved in it? No way, right? But it would be nice.
Feel like you have to be, though. It can definitely feel like you should be, or at least you should know, right? You should definitely be aware.
Yeah. And we do see people that kind of go the other direction and have FOMO on it, right? And it's like, oh, we definitely need to do this. I actually talked with a guy out of Baton Rouge, Louisiana this morning. He has a $4.8 million practice, which sounds great, right? But his EBITDA margin isn't quite where it needs to be, right? So we ended up talking about it. It's like, look, over the next year, I think these are the different things you need to work on, right? Maybe you need some help with that. Maybe those are the different folks that end up going to PDA and get helped with these different types of things, right? But if I look at it, I was like, okay, you really need to be at $5.5 million in production here in order to handle these expenses. Once you get there, then suddenly we'll have a much different outcome for you, right?
But that was what he was at 4.8.
4.8.
Yeah, so he's got to up his production significantly, I would say.
Yeah, he does. And he just brought on board a new associate, right? And so there were some ways for him to do these things. And again, hopefully that associate works out. But anyway, if you well, if you aided in it, we know that the percentage is much higher than standard industry, right? I can only hope. I've got my fingers crossed, so but I also think that him just being willing to reach out and be a learner and all those kind of things, it aided him in coming up with a plan, into the future, right? And
Absolutely.
I think that having a plan is paramount in these types of decisions, because once you have a plan, you can execute on something, right?
Yes.
And I can think about, a person I talked to, this was yesterday. She has a practice in the suburbs of Minneapolis, about $1 million practice, $1.1 million, something like that. And she called me and she's like, well, I want to be done in 6 months. It's like, okay, well, we can do that, right? But I have like an option for you, and just one, right? And so just know that if you are starting to think about what you want life to be in the future, all that kind of stuff, man, it's great if you have time to implement different types of concepts, because many of the different types of ways of being able to monetize your practice, they take time, And so if you only have a defined amount of time, man, we just we're making a decision by not making a decision,
Yeah, absolutely. Do you find, do doctors focus on, like when you do visioning exercises to see, did they come with a number in mind, or do you kind of help them get into that mindset of what kind of lifestyle they want and then work back from there?
Yeah, many of them do not come with a number in mind. If they have a really good financial planner, sometimes they know that they need to, be able to retire with a certain amount, right, and retire by a certain time. So some of them come with that type of knowledge.
Okay.
A few of them know how to value a practice, or what their value is worth, or maybe they've even set up their financial plan where the practice was worth nothing, just in case, all those kind of things.
Yes.
Whenever I ask the question, so the way I end up getting there is I say, okay, hey, here's the value that we came up with, right? This is how we did it. This is the methodology. But maybe the most important thing to me, Doc, is going to be, what is a magic wand scenario for you? If I give you the magic wand, like what is best for you going forward, right? Because if we can figure out what a best case scenario is for you, then suddenly we can back into what different ways are we going to use to get there? What kind of methodologies do we end up using? And so anyway, I asked that on every single prospectus review that I ended up going on, because you get so much really, really great qualitative information about what it is that they want out of life, right? And sometimes it's, oh my gosh, I really just want to be able to take 1 week off more per quarter, right? Or I want to be able to take my first 2-week vacation that I've ever taken in dentistry, right? Or
is that real? Oh, that's a shame. Dentists, take your time off. That makes my heart break. I don't like that at all.
I don't like it either, but again, if I hear it enough, then suddenly it kind of comes back out of my mouth as well, right? Or maybe it's like there's this gal that had 2 sets of twins back to back, right? And she has a $1 million practice, and she's like, what should I do? And I'm just like, it sounds like you need time. Like you need time away from this practice is what you need, And you can just see their bags under her eyes, all that kind of stuff. She just needs to be able to free up some time. And so, but everybody has different goals and what it is that they're trying to figure out in the long run. And sometimes that's more financial. Sometimes that's more emotional. Sometimes that's more operational. It kind of depends on the person.
I don't think I avoided it. I think I was just ignorant to financial advice for most of my young adult life. And when I turned 40, I started to kind of sweat, and I was like, I've been trying to do this on my own. It's not really working. Like I don't have any idea of what I'm going to need when I retire. And so, I ended up getting a financial advisor, and he shocked my system, because when I got on a call with him, super, super nice gentleman, but he didn't want to talk about numbers at all. He started asking me to time travel with him and look at my life when I was, 65 or 60 or 55 or what. He just kind of walked me back and asked me what kind of life I wanted. And he was able to get out from me everything. I didn't even know it existed in me until he walked this exercise through with me. I mean, I was like, as soon as my son graduates, I am actually going to go back to school. I want to get my PhD in this. I want to go and be in Italy and study there for a while. And it just all like came out. And he took all of that emotional goodness and he formulated into a financial plan and came back and said, okay, this is what you're going to have to put away per month. This is how this is structured and looked. I have full faith, full trust, and was like, okay, this might hurt a little bit, because I also realized I thought I wanted to retire like in my 50s, meaning like no more. And then I realized, no. I just wanted to drop down. Like I'd love to work 3 days a week. That's totally possible and doable.
Yep. Can I tell you a funny story that kind of relates to that a little
Yeah.
bit? Okay. So this is one of my favorites. I've told it a few times, but okay. So there's this doctor out in Virginia Beach. This was much earlier on in my career. This is, I think, 11 years ago. And we talked about having individual purchase this practice, all that kind of stuff. He thought that was the way he wanted to do it. We ended up getting an offer from a DSO at that point and kind of looked at it. And man, we negotiated like crazy because he said, I am going to be done in 2 years. I'm not going to set foot in this office ever again. Like, I just need to be done. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so we were able to negotiate that with the group, and what this was 11 years ago. He's still working a day a week in the office, by the way. So,
and is he happy? He's probably happy.
He's happy. So really what he wanted, right, was he wanted the ability to go down to Miami and go red fishing, right? And so like, if he was able to get on his boat and he was able to do that for a week, he comes back up and he gets to see the folks that he really has cared about for a really long time. That's like, that was another part of what he wanted. It's just a needed reformat in a way. And so it is kind of funny as people go through these types of deals, like how things change and how your vision really gets crystallized, you know? Because
I think we can just tend to think in such black and white terms.
Completely.
It's like all or nothing. And I don't know. I love what I do. I can't really actually imagine not doing it, but I don't know why my brain was set up to being like, you have to do it or you can't do it at all. Once I figured out that there's a big gray area between it. And yeah, one day a week, now he still gets to change lives. He probably feels great about that. And he gets to go fishing.
Yep, exactly. Well, it's kind of interesting. The group that we ended up going with, he ended up wrapping in a $250,000 equity stake into that group. And that $250,000 11 years ago has turned into 8 figures, right? And and that's also a life-changing
really
amount,
happy,
right? And so like, anyway, I'm really glad that he was able to just kind of see the forest through the trees, and rather than just like, okay, I need to be done. I need to have this doctor come on board. I'll work back with him for 1 year and that is it. He just kind of let go of the reins a little bit. And then he got an outcome that is way more optimal than he would have ever imagined to start out with.
You know, Victoria Peterson always, one of her I would call it her catchphrase. I don't know if she'd like that, but one of her catchphrases, success requires support. And I tend to have it on sticky notes all around because we often think that we can do it ourselves. And I'm wondering if we can talk a little bit about advice and support, because you're going to have to look at both of those. You know, I think how did doctors find you, first of all, and are they actively seeking advice for these decisions?
Yeah. Well, I guess, how do they find me? That variety of ways, right? And so, so sometimes that's going to be referrals. Like, we're probably not too different from a dental practice in a way, right?
Yeah.
That if we take good care of somebody, then the chances are then they refer friends, right? And so I always kind of say that if we're not very good at what we do, our business is not going to last for very long, right? Dentistry is a small world, and that doesn't mean we bat 1,000. I would love to say that we do. That's not a possibility, right?
Well, nobody's perfect.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, gosh darn it, we try hard. So the other way is going to be sometimes they end up hearing me talk at some location, and then suddenly somebody calls in for whatever reason. That's kind of an interesting one to me. The one that I still do not understand for the life of me is going to be the social media stuff. Like, I don't get it. But that's
found you off of Facebook.
What'd you say?
They found you off of Facebook.
They do sometimes. And it's just, it's kind of funny. Like, okay, how did you make the decision to call me in the first place? It's just kind of interesting to me. But one way or the other, I think that if I look at it from an advisor standpoint, the key is going to be understanding the incentives that whatever your advisor is that they're telling you. So that starts with me, right? So like, I am technically a mergers and acquisitions advisor, right? So I get paid whenever a transaction closes, right? So if you think about that, what you should think of, okay, there's this implicit bias that he should try to close this transaction, right? Now, I know that the advice that I'm going to give is going to be great, right? And so because I want to be able to sleep at night, right? And I want to be able to make sure that I'm going to be able to handle that person and all their friends and all that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
So I know that it's important to me, but if you go into it, you should like, okay, well, you should at least know that I could have that implicit bias, right? I think about the exact same thing whenever I hear doctors talking about their friends' experiences, right? Just know that your comparable base there, like, how many people have you talked to? 5? You know, if you've talked to 5, that's just not very many that you can pull like, oh, this is the way that this is going to go. Maybe they had an associate and maybe that person bought in and maybe that person bought them out. It went absolutely beautifully. Well, the numbers tell me that's not statistically the norm, right?
Wow.
So if I also look at it and I say, okay, well, you had a really, really bad experience with or your friend had a really bad experience with the DSO. Well, okay, that is possible. But if I go back through and chart our 500 transactions, right, and I look at happiness indicators of doctors and after they've already had that transaction,
Yeah.
the ones that have done an individual transaction, and ones that have done one with a group or with a DSO, their happiness indicators are nearly identical. Right?
Really?
Yeah, they
That's
really
fascinating.
are. Yeah.
Well, if you're doing your homework, which it sounds like you're doing a lot of exhaustive homework to find that perfect pair, it's almost like a matchmaking service of sorts.
Yeah, it kind of is. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, and actually, I'll give credit. So, David Porritt, who's part of the PDA team. So, I mean, he wrote an entire doctoral thesis on this,
Yes.
right, about happiness of doctors going into new environments and all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of really, really great stuff in there. Now, you have to sit there and read it, right? So it's
Yes,
a
you
long
do.
read, but it's really, really interesting stuff about, why there is going to be happiness in whatever it is that you're deciding on. And a lot of it is going to be psychological, right? A lot of it is going to be, do they actually do what they say they're going to do? All those kind of things. But if you think about it, like, just understand the biases that the people are coming from, which is like, okay, so do they have enough comps to give you advice? What are their biases right there? And another one that kind of gets me a little bit is going to be lots of times we end up hearing, oh, well, hey, my CPA says I would not do this. And I was just like, okay, but if you think about it, think about the bias, right? So the bias is going to be, if you do this transaction, what are they losing? They're losing a client, right? And so now I'm not telling you that everybody is going at it in those terms, right? Because you could just come back to me and say, well, you're trying to tell them to do it because you get the benefit of it, right? Just understand that there's different cognitive biases out there.
Well, I love that you said that, because one thing at PDA, I know that we anticipate. So as Bruce says, we handle the objection before it's the objection. With CPAs specifically, as soon as a CPA tends to, now CPAs don't come at me, I'm not saying all of you, but what I have seen is typically they get the end of the year with the doctor and they say, oh, we see that you've got consulting or coaching as a line item, scratch it immediately. They do not ask any follow-up questions. What has this consulting company done for you? What has this coach done for you? They don't seem to ask it. They just see it and they know it's a line item that can be eliminated. Now, I never thought about it from a bias perspective of, well, they want to be able to improve the financial outcomes of that particular practice. So of course they're going to maybe not want to dig much deeper. Now, I think the CPA that's worth its weight though would probably say, tell me more about this.
Sure.
And I know when you and I met like a year ago, I was asking you some pretty pointed questions about branding and marketing, and does it really drive the value, and tell me what it is, because I want to know what the data is. Do you have any opinions around consulting, and have you seen consulting and coaching help optimize the practice? Because if you can follow my brain here, I'm thinking of coming to you and you say, okay, we got to get you up to 5.5. You're sitting at 4.8. Do you just like send people on their way and be like, good luck? Or how do we link that so they can actually improve their performance?
Yeah. So I guess first and foremost, it depends. It depends on what it is that they need help with. Right. And so I think I'm going to answer your question in a way that you might not expect. So whenever we go through a P&L, right, and we end up seeing that consulting line item on there, one of the first things we do is we underline it, right? And the reason that we underline it is we call that a discretionary spend, right?
Okay.
A discretionary spend does not mean bad, does not mean wrong. It just means that it is their choice of whether they're spending that money or not, right?
So like Prime Day on Amazon.
There you go.
My husband, it was just discretionary.
Yep, exactly. So now in our experience, whenever we go through and look at a practice, it's funny, the tail is in the tape, right? So we end up looking at the revenue, we look at how the expenses are managed, and we see what the EBITDA ends up being. Is this an investable practice? Is this not an investable practice? And I can tell you how effective that consultant is, right?
You can see it in the numbers.
100%. Yeah, definitely. And so as I go through and give them advice, if they already have a consultant, right? And let's say that their payroll is out of whack and they're not producing very much on an hourly basis, and they're not getting very many new patients in, or whatever it is they should be working on.
Yep.
And I see that consulting line item. One of the first things I say is like, well, maybe I can refer you to somebody who actually knows what they do, like a PDA, right? As a for instance, right? So
well, you get like a rolling 12 probably, or maybe you get years worth of financials. So you are doing your homework.
3 years worth.
So oh my gosh, that would be fascinating. You can see that line item and then you can watch all your new patient, all the key indicators.
Oh yeah.
Of course.
Yep. So yeah, I can tell you how effective the consulting group is, right? And so And that doesn't mean, again, I'm not the arbiter of all things by any stretch of your imagination, but I do believe numbers tell a story. You talked about telling a story earlier, and I do believe that. And so if it tells a story, it's going to tell effectiveness of that consultant, or it tells how teachable is that client. So that can be the other part about it, right? So if then I say, okay, well, maybe you try out a different consultant, right? And then we end up seeing the exact same thing. Well, then my conversation with the doctor is, this isn't going to change, right? You know, and if it's not going to change, just know that, like, hey, you've set up this limiting factor around your life, right? And this is what you have, right? And so, but yes, we see some consultants end up putting practices on rocket ships, right? I'm not just saying this because I'm on your podcast, but I would say PTA is definitely that type, right? That you can see over the course of time. I think I probably appraised 50 or 60 PDA practices, right? Of which they're phenomenal, right? The median is just absolutely through the moon. I think that, you know, out of the 50, the median deal was like $2.6 million and something like $900,000 in EBITDA. That's the middle, right? So I mean, that means there's just as many above that we've appraised. And so anyway, and again, I'm not trying to butter you up. It's just that that's what we see. So.
Wow. Yep. Well, David Porritt taught me that unicorn is an actual financial term.
It is.
And I'll tell you, when you pour your life into something, so next year PDA will be coming up to 20 years.
Wow.
Yeah. And I know for Bruce and Victoria, leaving a legacy is so important. So it feels good in your heart. I think because, you know, you want to, well, our unofficial tagline is doing good while doing good. So you want to know you're making a difference. I think everybody, you know, at their core wants to make a difference and wants to help, you know, and it's good to feel that there are resources like PTS that are, you know, an advocate for doctors. That's what you are. You're an advocate. And also you're not just an advocate for the dollar, you're an advocate for the best fit and the best deal that works for them and their lifestyle. Kyle, it has been a joy to talk with you today.
Vice versa. I've had a blast.
Yeah. How can doctors get a hold of you?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you go to our website, www.professionaltransition.com, both of them are singular, professional transition. Apparently you can find us all over social media. I am not the person who does that, just so you know. Or else you can just email us at info@professionaltransition.com.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you as well. It's been a true pleasure.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Everyday Practices Podcast. Chad and I are here every week thanks to our community of listeners just like you, and we'd love your help. It would mean the world if you can help spread the word by sharing this episode with a fellow dentist and leave us a review on iTunes or Spotify. Do you have an extraordinary story you'd like to share or feedback on how we can make this podcast even more awesome? Drop us an email at podcast@productivedentist.com. And don't forget to check out our other podcasts from Productive Dentist Academy at productivedentist.com/podcasts. See you next week.